Thank you for being here. My name is Amy Jackson. We're at the Asheville Area Chamber of Commerce and the Director of Engagement. I'm responsible for our Smart Series program that we have today. We produce this program monthly through the Chamber, but this year we've decided to partner with the Western North Carolina Diversity Engagement Coalition, focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion for our community. First, I want to introduce Zoom Kofu as the chair of the Diversity Engagement Coalition, as well as the Buncombe County Community Health and Assessment Improvement. So you may have the floor.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome to all of today's Smart Series participants. As Amy mentioned, the WNC Diversity Engagement Coalition is partnering with the Chamber to sponsor this event. The WNC DEC, as we affectionately refer to ourselves, is a coalition of a network of organizations dedicated to increasing diversity, equality, and inclusion in the Western North Carolina region. The WNC DEC brings people together to collectively support professional development, engagement, and inclusion of multicultural people within our member organizations, as well as our region's employers and community-based organizations to serve as a resource for the region for best policy and practice regarding equity and inclusion in the workforce. And we are soon now helping facilitate conversations for our community. Over the next year, we will be working with the WNC, with the Chamber to produce this Smart Series. And so today, we want to set the stage for the coming months to really learn where are the opportunities in our region. And thus have partners with a regional economist, Tom DeViet, founder of Geneva Economics, to share some insights. Tom is a research economist and president and founder of Geneva Economics LLC. Tagline, understand your economy. And Geneva is incorporated in the state of North Carolina since 2003. Geneva Economics is an innovative leader in data-driven regional economic analysis. Tom's broad portfolio includes economic assessments for dozens of communities nationwide, industry targeting, economic impact analyses, workforce and skills assessments, microdemographic analyses, and a host of custom analyses answering specific site and client needs. The range of research activities has been as diverse as economic impact analyses of universities, international airports, and major infrastructure projects, to microdemographic analyses of neighborhood gentrification and sub-state health insurance coverage. Geneva economic clients include economic developers, chambers of commerce, municipalities, workforce development boards, site selections, commercial developers, community organizations, universities, airports, architectural, and planning firms. You can hear that Tom brings a wealth of knowledge to this conversation and to the report that we shall soon see a summary analysis of. Tom currently teaches the Applied Analysis course for the Council for Community and Economic Research, C2ER, in Arlington, Virginia. The course instructs federal, state, and local government researchers in economic and demographic analysis at the region level. Mr. Tom DeViet has a bachelor's in economics from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and a master's of business administration and finance from California Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks, California. So before we begin, we want to start with at least testing all of today's webinar attendees' assumptions or understanding of what will be. And so with that, I want to first, before Tom opens the presentation, introduce and welcome our Vice Chair of the WNC-DEC, Paulina Mendez, with the City of Asheville. Paulina?
Hi everyone, welcome. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited that y'all are here. Paulina Mendez, I'm the training consultant for the Office of Equity and Inclusion at the City of Asheville. And if you're into data, you're in the right place, so welcome. So we do have a poll for you. We have a couple of Zoom polls, and Erin is going to launch it and help me do that. And so, Erin, if you could launch that poll for folks to fill out, we want to know, right? What are you most interested in learning about in this discussion? We're going to cover a lot of different things, but we kind of want to see where we want to get a pulse of the room, right? So you have some options: employment trends in race, employment trends in ethnicity, employment trends in gender, employment trends in age. So go ahead and select what you are the most interested in learning about today. And while we're getting that poll going, I do also just want to mention that there are different intersections, right? So what do trends look like based on race and gender combined, right? So also something to think about. All right, let's see. Ooh, all right, 75% of us are interested in learning about employment trends in race. We got 11% for employment trends in ethnicity. Why do I keep wanting to say trends? And employment trends in gender as well, and 4% there, and 11% in employment trends in age. Very interesting. All right. Thank you so much. Tom? Tom, ooh, perfect.
Tom, you're muted.
Better? Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, the kind introduction, and thank you for your time. And I want to thank the Coalition for their commitment to honest and objective data. So if you like data, this is going to be a good 30, 35 minutes of data. I do not get hired for my opinion. I get hired to share data and to inform my clients. So what you do with the data is up to you. This is also a highlight from a report that's probably about 40 pages, so we're just going to hit the top findings. There's much more in the full report. And as Zoe mentioned, this is an update of a report that was done originally in 2017, which we used 2016 data. So let's just jump in really quick here. We're going to be looking at what happened since the 2016 data. Where are we now? And I have now in quotation marks because the most current data, unfortunately, is 2019, and we all know that 2020 is a lot different than 2019. So I do have an addendum where we'll look at COVID-19 impacts via unemployment data. Quick background, we're looking at data from the U.S. Census Bureau. This is really good data. It's called linked employer-employee microdata. It takes your IRS, Social Security data, and it combines it with your employers. And then, of course, it scrubs your name out of there. But it's good, better data than we have ever had before, and it's probably better than some of the population data that you're used to. And then, as I mentioned before, we're going to augment that with some unemployment demographics that take us all the way through August of this year. The geographies in the report are the 4 metro counties of Buncombe, Haywood, Henderson, and Madison, which combined make up the Asheville metro area. And then in the report, we also have data on Transylvania. And in the report, each one of the counties is broken out individually if you're interested. The workforce statistics are 5 race groups, 1 ethnicity, that would be Hispanic, Latino, gender, male or female, and 6 age groups. So there's quite a bit of detail in the data. Now the data is for those demographic groups, and it's where they work as far as industry and earnings. But I want to mention here that the data does not account for individual employee education, employee tenure, how long they've worked someplace, experience, and training. So there's differences there that we just can't get to with this data set, and I think it's important that you should know that. Just a quick reminder, that's the 4-county metro area. I do work all over the country, and usually the terms that we work with as far as looking at regional economies are metropolitan areas. And as you may or may not know, a metropolitan area is an urban economic area, generally where surrounding counties commute into central, and that's what happens here. Most workers commute into Buncombe County, and most Buncombe County employees end up actually in the city of Asheville. I think it's about 56% are in the city itself. So that's what we're talking about here. So let's start out with looking at what's happened since 2016. And I should tell you, I know we're on Zoom, and I know that a lot of words on a screen are going to put you to sleep. So we're going to stick with graphics, and I'll try to explain what we're looking at as best I can. But I know this is a challenge, and if I was standing in front of a room, at least you'd have somebody to look at. But here you've got a screen, and we'll try to make it as interesting as possible. But it is the data. So first, where have we been? You probably already know we've had an incredible period, about 9.5 straight years of unbroken growth, employment growth in the metro area. We're looking at the last 4 years here, which shows that we added 13,406 jobs just between 2016, or 3 years, 16, 17, and 18 and 19, end of 19, up 7.5%. So remember that 7.5%. 7.5%, that's going to be our benchmark. That's what the metro grew. So now that first question in the poll, we're going to see how do things compare. When you look at genders, this is by percentage, remember. 7.9% increase for female employment. The little blue numbers, by the way, at the bottom are the absolute numbers. To go across the slide and stay in percentages, we're going to need to stay with percentages, but I do have the actual numbers below just so you know. Now we get to those five race groups, and as you can see, the 4 there grew faster than the 7.5, and one of them, the white group, grew at 6.5. So percentage growth was real strong for the 4, what we will see are the minority worker groups, and not so much for white overall. So that's the takeaway for the slide, that the smaller minority racial groups outperformed as far as job growth, white or male. And then for the ethnicities, Hispanic or Latino, we see the same pattern as well. Not Hispanic or not Latino grew at 7%, whereas Hispanic or Latino grew at a very strong 17.4%, which translates into a net increase of 1,674 jobs. We can do the same analysis for earnings. This is average monthly earnings, which is $3,656. It's about $43,800 annually. Again, just like with employment growth, we've had this great period after the recession where we've had strong earnings growth, and up about 341 jobs per month, or 10.3%. From 2016 to the end of 2019. So good, strong growth. Now, how does that work? How does that 10.3% work out to the different demographic groups? Here's a male and female. Again, the little blue numbers in the bottom are the absolute numbers, but you can see that female workers on average had an 11.2% increase in monthly earnings, outpacing males of 9.5%. And then very similar to the last chart you saw with total employment growth, earnings growth, again, for the 4 smaller minority racial groups as far as employment, actually had larger percentage increases in monthly earnings, and similarly, Hispanic or Latino as well. So outsized earnings and employment growth for minority and female and Latino workers. I mentioned that the report also talks about age groups. There's 6 different age groups, worker age groups. This is the only slide I have on that in the report. There's a lot more detail, but you can imagine when you start comparing each one of those groups, it's a report in and of itself. What is interesting here, the light blue is the number of workers in those age groups in 2016, and then the little red squares on top is the increase 2016 to the end of 2019. And you can see, number one, there was increases in every single group. Now, what is fascinating, if you look at 2016, the three largest groups in the middle were all about equal. They're all about 38,000 workers, but you can see that the increase 2016 to 2019 was not equal by any means. Ages 25 through 34 had a significant increase. I think that was, let me look it up here really quick, in percentage terms, that was 8.5% increase in ages 25 through 34. Remember, we're at 7.5 overall. And you can see at the top of those bars now that the 25 through 34 is by far the largest work group in the Asheville metropolitan area. And I should say, from an economic development standpoint, many communities are begging for younger workers. So this last few years, we've done a good job attracting those workers as well. And I want to point out another little group here that you may not pay much attention to. That's ages 65 and plus, which is the smallest. But look at that 2,553 net new workers. That's the second largest gain of any group. And that, in percentage terms, workers 65 and over increased by 22.5%. So a real boom in older workers, which I would expect that to be continuing as well up further. So what does that mean? We've had that growth. What does that mean right now? How do we compare? Here's the total numbers. And in the report, it's broken out by every county as well. And you can see some of those numbers are still relatively small. Look at the native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders, only 326, even though you noticed earlier before there was some pretty good growth there, but still a relatively small number. Also want to point out, just for those of you that are very mathematically inclined and are counting up the numbers as I go through my presentation, in the middle there's two or more race groups. I don't count those anywhere. They just kind of confuse everybody because they don't tell you what those two or more race groups actually are. So this is the only place you'll see them, and that's just so everything adds up correctly. And then Hispanic or Latino, I have that as green because remember, Hispanic or Latino is an ethnicity, and that ethnicity can be in any one of those blue bars. We're not sure where. So what does that look like comparing? Well, I looked at the 15 metropolitan areas within North Carolina. That's really our economic drivers. Those are our big urban areas. I'm sure you would recognize or be familiar with all of these. And as you can see, there we are at the very top. This is percentage of employment, which is white. There's 168,000 white workers. In 2016, that number was 88.2%. So 0.2% difference in those years since 2016. Similarly, you might not be surprised, if we look at Black and African American workers at 8%, is the lowest in the state. It's about 15,000 workers, although, as you noted earlier, good, strong growth. In 2016, Black and African American workers comprise 7.9%. So it's bumped up a 0.1% since 2016. It's probably worth noting right now, just so you know what we're looking at here, if you were to compare population size, percentage of the total population that is Black and African American in the 15 metropolitan areas, although the percentages would change a little bit, the rankings would be exactly the same. So it doesn't change at all. In fact, I think our total population right now, Black and African American, is 4.8%. Hickory's like 6.6%. And if you accordingly ranked everything up and down, it would be the same. So it corresponds directly to the population as well. Here's Asian. Population or workforce, 1.7%. State is 3.2. We're down the bottom third there. Percentage is the same as in 2016. It's about 3,000 workers. And then here's Native American Indian or Native Alaskan, 0.6%. Again, this number is about 1,000 workers, and that's the same as 2016. And just because you're curious, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, there's only 300 approximately workers in the metro area, and there's not a lot in any of the metros in the state, and that has stayed the same since 2016 as well. Here's Hispanic or Latino, 5.9% of the workforce, 5.7% in 2016, about 11,000 workers, again, who have had percentage terms pretty strong growth between 2016 and 2019. Here's female workers. That's about 99,000 of the total workforce. In 2016, that number was 50.3%. Again, a little bit above the state. But even when you look at the top 56 and the bottom 48, there's not a huge range of differences across all metros. And I think if you were to consider at the top there some of the large military bases, they might have a role in those numbers as well. So what about average monthly earnings? We talked about growth. Here's the actual numbers, and here we do see some big differences. I added the percentage differences just so you know. So there's pretty significant differences. So a male average earnings is about 17% higher than the overall average. Black and African American, 28% below at $2,646. White, 3% above. Hispanic and Latino, 23% below. So some big disparities when it gets to average monthly earnings. In the report, we took a closer look at female workers, Black and African American, and Hispanic with a lot of detail. And I'll share a few slides from that, and that's where you get to see some of the stronger differences and disparities. You can see right there, this is average monthly earnings by industry. All industry earnings, about 29% difference there. But as you can see, these are some of the larger. I looked at about between 70 and 90 different industries in the report. And as you can see, there's some pretty big differences. For example, ambulatory healthcare services, which is one of the larger industries in the metro. I think that's like a 48% difference between a white or African-American worker. So big differences all the way across. Probably a question you might have, is there any industry in which Black and African-American workers make more than white workers? And I had to dig, and they're very small industries. I wrote them down here. They're textile mills, ground passenger transportation, broadcasting, and a small sector called performing arts and spectator sports. Each one of those industries, actually, earnings were greater for Black workers than white workers, but I'll have to add a little asterisk. Those entire industries, those four industries, were only 230 Black workers. So there are some, not very representative overall, I guess is what I would say. And then recall that we know pretty well that 8%, that's what the bar represents, or the line there, of the percent of the total workforce of the metro area. And so you can look at those individual industries and you can see if there's over or under representation. And here's some of the larger industries that have some pretty significant differences in representation. For example, right in the middle, hospitals, 5.2% of workers are Black and African American. We've got educational services, 3.6. Some big differences there. I looked at 75 different industries here in the metro area, and 63% of them, or 47 of the 75, have underrepresentation of Black or African American workers. That is less than 8%, and the remaining 23 have over. Now here's some of those 23 here. I picked out some of the industries that were larger and you'd recognize. And if you look at some of these industries here too, it might help explain why there was such strong relative growth for some of the workers, Black and American, African American workers. So you can see in here we have food services and drinking places, accommodations, and we all know those had real good, strong growth. And those industries were overrepresented Black and African American workers. So do the same thing quickly here for, this is female and male workers. There's the industry average right in the middle there, which is, I think it's 64%. I wrote that down, but not clear enough. Or 38% difference there. But there's some real gaps here. If you look at the top, ambulatory healthcare services, that's if I did my math right, 164% difference there between a male or female worker. And then you can work your way down to the next, professional, scientific, and technical services, which are some of those high-wage knowledge workers. There's about a 64% difference there. And then we can work our way down similarly and look at representation under and over-representation. Recall that female workforce is 51.9% of the metro, and here are some of the larger industries that are underrepresented. And you'll see a lot of manufacturing, construction, that sort of industry here. Again, some of those industries had pretty good growth. Of 82 different industries that I looked at, there were 68% or 56 that had underrepresentation of female workers, and only 32% of industry sectors were overrepresented. And here's an example of those industries. Social assistance there at the top, that a big piece of that would be child care. So if you quickly look down this row, you're going to see a lot of personal or health-related overrepresentation of female workers. So what about COVID-19? As I told you already, the data that I just presented was all 2019, where we have real good data. And we're sort of on a cliff there because we know that soon after 2019, 2020 came and everything blew apart. However, one set of data that we can look at that would be a little bit helpful here is the state in March began to publish unemployment claims by age, gender, and race. And so I'll show you two examples of that and what I've done with that to give us an insight of what's happening. Now, anybody that's followed the whole unemployment business politics right now would know that somewhere in June and July, the numbers, the amount that claimants would get dropped fairly dramatically. I don't know the exact date, but you can see the drop off there from 29,000 in June to 15,500 in July may have something to do with the amount of money that a claimant would receive as opposed to whether or not they have a job. You can see the peak at 35,000, but it still represents the number of people that are employed. It's a good sample. And so what I've done here is I took our number that we knew very well, and that's the total workforce in 2019. Recall 8% were Black or African American, and then I looked at how that compares to the percent of unemployment claimants. And the takeaway here is the percentage that are Black or African American has been rising incrementally every month into a place now that the percentage is actually greater than what you would expect if it was equal to the representation of the workforce overall. So it would indicate, it's not confirmed, but it would indicate that Black or African American workers are being more heavily, disproportionately impacted by the COVID than other workers. And there's that 10.1. And then finally, did the same thing for females. Remember, 51.9%, and where we're at in August at 54.9. And so you can see in March, it started out at 59, and then it dropped until June, and it looks like it's either flattening or increasing, indicating disproportionate impact. So that'll be something that going forward to keep an eye on. So here's the quick highlights. From 2016 to 2019, all racial, ethnic, and genders experienced employment and earnings growth. That's the good numbers. Growth rates of minorities, females, Latino, and Hispanics outpaced both whites overall and males. Compared to other NC metros, Asheville metro workforce is among the least diverse. That didn't change by much, only a couple point percentages. There are significant disparities that exist in earnings and industry representation. And the early signs, very early signs, indicate that COVID-19 may be disproportionately impacting Black, African American, and female workers. So with that, I want to thank you for your patience. I hope that's some information that will be useful for you going forward. And I'm going to stop my share now.
Unmute. I was so interested in it, I forgot what I was doing. Thank you so much, Tom. That's great information. It's so interesting to me. I'm kind of a data nerd. I don't like to tell everybody I am, but it's just so interesting to me how things work together so well. First, I want to introduce Dylan Samosco from Pisgah Legal. She is the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Program Director there. Dylan, tell us a few things that Pisgah Legal has done to promote equity, inclusion, and just what's going on at Pisgah, please.
Yeah, happy to, Amy. Thank you for inviting us. One of the things that Pisgah Legal Services right now is working on is developing our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion program. While we've been around for 42 years, we have not had historically a program that really asked us to center conversations about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And a couple years back, some of our staff and our leadership started asking questions about, where that was within our priorities. And so we've come forward and developed that. We've created an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. And one of the things that we're strongly focused on is recognizing that we, like everyone else, we simply have a lot to do in this context. We are in a learning and growing place. And like all of y'all, thank you, Tom, so much for the presentation. We are looking for ways to collect data to clearly understand what we are actually doing. So making choices about how to both center questions of equity, diversity, and inclusion for our staff internally, for the communities that we're serving, and to make ourselves available to learn from others as well. So those are some of the steps we're taking. We're implementing a across-the-board culture survey. I think one of the things that organizations can really do to commit, to make a statement about what our commitment is simply to say that equity, diversity, and inclusion work belongs in our budget. And that was a key part of conversations we had early on, saying we were going to form a program. We made an agreement that we weren't going to form a program that didn't have a budget. And so simply advocating for this to be work that we acknowledge is so important, we are going to fund it because we owe that to our employees, we owe that to our community, and to our peers. We need to answer to our community to say this is a priority. So those are some of the steps we've taken.
Great, thank you. Two things that hit me. You say money talks. You're right, money talks. If there's money behind it, people will listen. If they're spending money, people will listen. And also, we owe it to our community. We really do. The general community, we owe it. So thank you. Thank you for the work Pisgah is doing. Now I'd like to introduce a young man who needs no introduction. I'm the CEO of the YMCA, Mr. Paul Vest. Paul, give us some insight I know the Y has been working diligently and extremely hard on this. So tell us what's going on there.
Hi, Amy. Thank you. Yeah, I would say probably for the last 5 to 10 years, we have started the discussion in the organization about the importance of our diversity and inclusion work and what that meant to us as an organization. Certainly our commitment to serving the entire community and making sure our representation was such that we looked like our community, and created an environment that welcomed all, and just like our mission statement asks us to do. I will say that we have a long ways to go. Part of it is a historical perception as an organization in this community, and some things barriers to break down, especially around the African American and community, and the welcomeness that maybe historically we have not been part of. Our greatest success, candidly, has been in the LGBTQ work. We have worked really hard at trying to create safe and open environments for our staff. We created what we call our ERG, or employee resource groups, which bring people specifically from the LGBTQ community and allies, as well as the multicultural, because of the low numbers of specifically African American employees. We mixed a multicultural group and started some of that work again with folks from those communities and those allies. Those have really been kind of a safe place for us as an organization. My wife and I have had both groups at our home for dinner, and I will say that this has certainly been a personal priority for me as the CEO. But and I think that's where it had to start. But I have been wonderfully surprised and felt just a lot of benefit that we've had a number of our staff that have embraced this work within the organization and really hold it as a priority as part of our culture as an organization. So we still have a lot of work to do. I have some greater interests especially in the African American community, of how we can create environments where that population feels good about coming into our organization, but also on a bigger scale feels good about what the community can offer as a whole. And we know the numbers, we see this happening. We know it's going to be good for us as an organization. It's going to make us richer culturally, but it's also a good bottom line. We've got to be recognizing that when you start seeing the demographics changing across our nation, that we better be open to serving all, like our mission statement states. So a lot of work to do. We've been at it now for a while, and continue to look forward to some new opportunities for us.
Great. Thank you so much. There was, again, the bottom line. The money talks. Make sure you're paying attention to that. I want to speak to one thing that Paul said, as well as this comes from leadership. When leadership is bought in and agrees and walks the walk and talks the talk, it's not hard to follow. It's not something that's unattainable. I will say at the chamber, Kit is our president, and she walks the walk and talks the talk through the equity and diversity lens, and it does make a difference throughout the entire organization. So I really appreciate you speaking to that, Paul.
Sure.
And thank you for being here as well. Paulina, I'm going to send it back to you. We have another poll, if you will, for us to see what we've learned or what we want to talk about some more. So Paulina, or Aaron, I think, should do the poll, right?
Yeah, Aaron's going to fire up the poll, but I want you to think a little bit, right? Based off of what you've learned, some of the information may be surprising to you. Some of it may not be a surprise at all, right? The inequities were pretty obvious. The lack of diversity in our metro area is pretty obvious, right? So I want y'all to think about, and Aaron, you can go ahead and put the poll up. No matter where you are in your organization, obviously you care about advancing equity and inclusion, right? So no matter where you are in your organization, based off of what you learned, what needs to change in your organization? Is it recruitment? Is it organizational culture and climate? Is it retention efforts? Is it promotional practice? Is it other? Feel free to put it in the chat. Is it all of the above, right? And what I'll also say is that this work can feel overwhelming, but I want to just encourage y'all to be brave and be innovative, because this work isn't about perfection, right? This work is about sharing power. It's about accountability, and it's about doing things that are a little scary so we can actually see a change and see that needle move. So yeah, based off of what you've learned, what needs to change in your organization? And I think I see some things coming up in the chat, all of the above. And you know what, if it's all of the above, that is okay. And you got to start somewhere. And the thing that has come up with the data conversation is it's important, right? What you're counting, how you're counting, and really what you're paying attention to is a reflection of the values of your organization. All right, so let's see, it looks like 29% of us think recruitment, right? 24% organizational culture and climate, 22% with retention efforts, 16% with promotional practices, and other. And there were some comments that came up in the chat. What I also want to really encourage everyone on this call to remember is that you can't have diversity without equity and inclusion, right? So if you are going out there and recruiting, by all means, please, and be sure that the folks you're recruiting are coming into an environment that's equitable and inclusive so folks can stay. Right?
Got it.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paulina.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you to Zoe and Paulina from the Diversity Engagement Coalition. It is my pleasure to work alongside you, as well as Crystal Sheriff, our program director. Thank you for putting your energy into this as well. Tom, thank you for your information. Super informative, lots to swallow. Paul and Jack and Dylan, thank you so much for your 2 cents. We love to see regular businesses, employers telling about what they're doing. It helps to give other people in business information, some things to think about. And to all you attendees, there were 78 of us on today. So that's a really nice number to show that there is interest here and that we all want to work together. I want to throw it back to Zoe for just a minute to tell us, you do have access to this information, and access also if you're interested in joining the Western North Carolina Diversity Engagement Coalition. Zoe, can you tell us how to get to both of those, please?
Yes, thanks, Amy, and thanks to all of our panelists today. So we know that Tom went through lots of detail, and that you may also be interested in learning more about how to operationalize your equity and inclusion and belonging goals that your organization may have. And so to do that, you can visit our website, which is wncdec.org. And then also you can send an email if you would like to access the data. And that is at info@wncdec.org.
Say those websites again, Zoe.
So correcting myself, the website is wncdec.com, and it is info@wncdec.com for the email. And we'll put them in the chat.
Yes, they're both on the chat. Great. Thank you all. Thank you so much. I love doing these sessions. I love the interest. I love working with all of the panelists and seeing all of you out there. Thank you again. We have these every month, so check our website, ashevillechamber.org. You can participate, and we'll do it again next month. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of it's beautiful outside. Go outside.
And Amy, if I could, one more, just also wanted to call folks to an opportunity. So we know that, what do you do about it and what's next? One of the key developmental opportunities that the WNCDEC hosts is the walking through of one of the most recognized models and training tools for diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And that is the GDIB, or Global Diversity, or the Global Diversity Benchmarks tool. And so we are working with one of our region's partners, which is Deborah Miles, formerly of the Diversity Center at UNC Asheville. And so we convene a monthly work sessions, and she's also available, as there are other consultants in the area, to work your organization through some of those very key important milestones. So you don't necessarily have to go it alone. That is really one of the primary reasons why this coalition exists. As we know, this work is, if you're doing it right, it's going to be tough. It is iterative. However, through really embracing a collective impact approach, where we work, across sectors, across our organizations, it can be done, as that's really at the heart as what we're talking about as a systems level approach. And so we thank you all for, considering that, and want you to know, beyond this series and also the WNC-DEC, there are lots of resources in our community, and we will soon be having a much more robust equity capacity learning dashboard on our website as well. So we thank you.